Oh yeah, it's no, this is the shirt from the Big Lebowski. Yeah, that's the actual. I broke into Jeff Bridges' house. 2, 3, 4, ba da dee da ba da da, stu do da dee dee ba ba, do 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 do. It's Wednesday. I mean, hi. I gotta get better at this. Well, once I start uploading these to YouTube, it'll be what? All right. Picks of the week. Da-da-ba-da. Hi, my name is Jimmy. I went to the comic book store today. It's a hot one out there, folks. Sorry. I'm feeling alternately silly and rageful. Weird combo. Sorry. First, in this week's Picks of the Week, the question, the deaths of Vic Sage, number 3. Deaths of? Are those the name? Oh, can't believe this is finally back. Oh, and Dennis O'Neil just passed away. He didn't write this at all, but Denny O'Neil wrote the 1987 Question series, which was my very, 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 very first superhero comic book, and still one of my favorites, largely because of that run. Yeah, this is the Jeff Lemire, Bill Sienkiewicz, Dennis Cowan, then Bill Sienkiewicz Question series, and finally he's back on track. Although, well, in my case, I don't know how affected any of you. I know so little about you. How many of you are affected by this DC thing? Again, the thumbnail is that DC Comics is no longer distributing their product through Diamond Distributors, which distributes every single other publisher and has done since 1995. DC is now employing Midtown Comics and some other chain to distro, which makes sense, right? Why wouldn't you, use 2 Eastern Seaboard-based comic book chains to distribute your product nationwide? The owner of my shop thinks it might be an effort on DC's part, or on Warner Brothers, or AT&T, whoever owns DC at this point, to shut them down, which, I mean, if I weren't so much a Marvel zombie, it might really break my heart. That's all conjecture, P.S. There is no evidence for that at all. It just sounds like something that might happen. Anyway, I'm looking forward to this question book. No, my point is that I was going to say, oh no, what if I can't get the other 2, but since I already have this book on my pull list, it's not going to be a thing. Also, it's not like if I go into the shop and one of the Marvel books I want isn't there, I'll be like, oh man. And if one of the DC books I want isn't there, I'll be like, oh. But I mean, in both cases, I'll get them eventually anyway. And it's not as though I don't have anything else to read. I've read all these. What else did I get today? Oh, another series that's picked back up. Dying is Easy, number 5. I do believe this is the final issue of this mini-series about a former cop who's become a stand-up comedian and who's now a suspect in a murder, so he has to try to solve it so he doesn't get arrested and also blow his chance to get on Leno. It takes place in the late 90s. This is really good, and also, I mean, this cover's okay, but I kind of wish I'd looked at the other one. Because I don't know why Shit Talk Holmes would be in a scuba suit. It's been 3 months since I've read this book, so who knows. And then also, finally today, for the picks, I got this little number, 666 Bistro by Laura D. Graves. I'm not sure who the publisher is on this or anything about it. All I know is if there's something satanic involved, I'm at least going to be interested, especially something like this, because I say this with no small amount of embarrassment, more of a hipster Satanist. I'm not as into, all the death metal, all the bands from Sweden whose logos obscure their names, if anything. That aesthetic doesn't appeal to me. I like little, hot stuff from the Harvey comics, that kind of Satanism, the cute kind. Or something like this, which is just clearly more punk rock. This giant skull is wearing metal stuff, spikes, and those goofy 80s new wave shades. So I'm looking forward to that, and that's Picks of the Week. Oh boy, I got a lot of reading in last week, you guys, but still not enough, frankly. When will there ever be enough, Jim? The answer is never. What? All right. So first up from last week, I read Adventure Man number 1. Super fun. Really good stuff. Pretty much exactly what I expected it to be from the cover. Pulp style story, pulp adventure style story, like of the Depression era. And that's all I can remember. No, the Terry Dodson and Rachel Dodson, great artistic team. I'm always mixing up the Dodsons with the Moores. Never mind. I was gonna say Terry Dodson's other book, Strangers in Paradise. I'm like, oh wait, that's Terry Moore. How many dudes named Terry are in comics? What are they, Monty Python? Dude, that's a great reference. Great reference. Okay. Great. Also, last week I bought this little number, the Joker's 80th anniversary, sort of a 100-page giant, but this one costs twice as much as the other ones DC has been putting out lately. Oh, DC, you're not winning any friends in Van Nuys lately. This was fun. This was, again, about what you would expect, an oversized one-shot. So it has a bunch of self-contained Joker stories. I still like the Joker. I get that, for even before the movie came out last year, I would have agreed that the character had been done. Pretty much it's done. Honestly, really, since Killing Joke, they've never needed to do another Joker story, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not saying they shouldn't have. I'm just saying once the Killing Joke came out, and we're like, we're done, right? This is the perfect Joker story. But no, this was a lot of fun. And it also made me realize that the Joker had his own series in the 70s, which I remember at the time thinking, like, so in the late 80s when I started collecting comic books, I noticed eventually that all of the characters in Marvel Comics were heroes. None of the villains had their own books. I didn't know about Supervillain Team Up from the 70s. And then I remember at the time finding out that the Joker had his own title, and I was like, how come DC is giving villains their own series? Why won't Marvel do that for Juggernaut or Magneto? Which, of course, they eventually did. Oh, yeah. So they've recently collected all those 70s Joker stories into one omnibus, which I'll talk about those in a minute. But I'm looking forward to reading that once I get it. I seriously need to read more stuff before I do that. And then New Mutants number 10 I also got last week. This was a great book with the Rod Reese cover and Flaviano artwork on the inside. This is the most fun New Mutants series I've read. It probably has something to do with Armors in it. I always liked her. But I was never super into the original New Mutants. As much as I love Bill Sienkiewicz and his 80s work, I just never got into the book that much. It seems to me like, anyway, that it just wasn't as easy to find. Like, you could find Uncanny X-Men back then still at grocery stores and stuff, but New Mutants was a little more narrow a demo. So yeah, anyway, sorry. I don't know why I'm apologizing. I apologize for apologizing. Also, this week I got to read some tradey stuff. For example, the DC Universe by Mike Mignola. This was fun. It did take me a while to get through. Mignola's art was something, I might have mentioned this when I showed this off before, but it took me a while to kind of get Mignola, because he's not, like Walt Simonson, he's not representational, like, he's not like photographic like Alex Ross. He's not stylized in the way that a lot of guys back then were. Like Simonson and Mignola have a very distinct style and have done since the 80s. But especially when I started buying comic books and the artistic stylings of your Todd McFarlanes and your Jim Lees were all the rage, Mignola and Simonson were kind of in the opposite direction. So in both cases, it took me a while to warm up to him. Mignola longer than Simonson. Simonson I got into almost, and it was weird. It was like a switch flicked. I was reading X Factor number 42 or 3. It was one of the Inferno issues. And I remember this like it was yesterday. It must have been like late 88, early 89. I was at my best friend Jeremy Howell's house. And I'm reading this X Factor. And I remember thinking like, man, Wolverine looks stupid. I don't like this guy's art. And then turning another page and going, this is the best artwork I've ever seen in my life. I don't have no idea what even it was. I think it was just, by the time I got to the end of the book, I was like, oh man, this guy is an incredible artist. Because he was, early on in my comic book nerdery career, but I was already starting to figure it out, man. Anyway, that's not really the point, is it? Mike Mignola. So there, this is the thing with these trades too, and I've mentioned this. I mentioned it with the Brian K. Vaughan one. They tend to collect the early stuff And with like Alan Moore, I have the DC Universe by Alan Moore. Love it, love it, love it. Because I've always liked Alan Moore's smaller stories anyway. But with like Mignola, like he did a Phantom Stranger series in '87, which I love the Phantom Stranger. It was tough getting through this book. Why is my copy of Union Station right there? It was a little shout out to Andy Parks. What was I saying? Yes. Phantom Stranger. It was written by Paul Kupperberg, who I also... and then, he's fine, but he's not one of my favorite writers. And so there's like stuff like that. Even like, I think, unless I'm nuts, they put Deadman on the back cover because Mignola drew a cover of Showcase, I think it was, 94, 93, that had old Boston Brand on it. But there's no actual Deadman story drawn by Mike Mignola in this book, to my recollection, which is fine. I think I have every Deadman, like, Deadman title. But, yeah, it was good. It just took me a little longer to get through. I'm about to crack open the Len Wein one, and that one I'm looking forward to. And then, oh boy, this was the funnest one. Jack Kirby's The Demon. Again, mwah. I love it, I love it, I love it, I love it, I love it. That's all. You don't need me to say anything else. Well, I guess I'll just repeat myself from when I showed that off a few months ago. The Demon, which is a DC superhero, has always been one of my favorites because he was very off-kilter, for lack of a better term. He wasn't a goody-good. He wasn't a Boy Scout like Superman, but he wasn't like a Dark Knight like Batman is. He's a demon from the bowels of hell. Oh, that's an interesting superhero. There's a great... Mark Evanier did all the forwards, I think, for all these Jack Kirby omnibuy, which makes sense because as a high school kid, he was Jack Kirby's assistant or one of them. So he has all this inside scoop on Kirby. When I get to that book, the big Kirby book eventually, I'll get more of those stories, I'm sure. But he tells a story about how Jack came up with the demon, and it's fascinating. It was like DC wanted... Well, it's fascinating to me. DC wanted him... When he came to DC, he was like, I want to do the New Gods. And they were like, we'll do whatever you say, you're Jack King Kirby. But if you could take a crap book like Jimmy Olsen and draw that would be great. And also, if you could create us like 2 or 3 more new... Because the New Gods wasn't selling the way they'd hoped. Which, God bless Jack. And the New God stuff, which I haven't actually read all the way through. It wasn't as though Jack went to DC in 1964. This is like the early 70s. So, not that he was any less brilliant an artist, but he just didn't have the heat that he had. So New Gods wasn't doing too good, so they said, we want another superhero book, which I think that was when he created The Guardian, maybe? That's not the point. And then they're like, we want a horror book. It's the 70s. People like horror in the 70s. If you've seen the fashions of the time, that makes sense. And Jack was like, I don't want to do a horror book. I'm not a horror guy. He had done, obviously, superheroes, and he had done crime comics, and he had done romance, but horror was never really his thing. But, Evanier said, they all went to dinner. Like, Jack and his wife, Roz, took Mark and another guy that was an assistant, who I think grew up to be another, like, comic book guy, too. Took him to dinner, and Kirby was like, this is the way this is how I'm remembering the story, anyway. Kirby was like, I don't write no horror book, but maybe if it was a superhero that was a demon. And then he just started writing it. Like, it was like Evanier watched him talk himself into the demon. And what's more is that he was just supposed to create the book and maybe write the first issue. He wasn't supposed to have drawn the whole thing, but as soon as he started going, he's like, well, I can't let somebody else do this. So he wrote and drew the first 16 issues. This is his complete 16-issue run. And boy, oh boy, is it good. The only bummer thing is, if you're familiar with the character at all, the demon Etrigan, he speaks in rhyme. But that was not until the 80s. That was not until Alan Moore actually got a hold of the character and wrote that, and that became canon almost immediately. And I hate it when they write the demon when he does not speak in rhyme. Obviously, in Kirby's case, it's different. And there are occasionally rhymes, like, Gone, Gone, Form a Man, like the transition phrases for Jason Blood to turn into the demon and back still rhyme, and occasionally the demon would rhyme, but like I say, it was until Alan Moore started it. Anybody other than Jack Kirby, though, who writes the demon without rhyming, you're fired. Like, I can't believe... John Byrne did a series a few years ago where the demon didn't rhyme, and I think there was another one. Did he rhyme in Driven Out? Do you remember? That book kind of sucked anyway, but... Who? What? And I get it because John Byrne thinks he's John Byrne. So he's like, I don't have to write in rhyme if I don't want to. And it's like, honey, obviously you are uncomfortable with your abilities to write rhymes. I'm like mad at John Byrne lately for some reason. I'm just saying, if you want to write a demon book but you don't want to write rhymes, think of another book to write. Wow, how did I get so angry? Shut up! Sorry. Ugh, it's already 15 minutes. All right, I'll make this quick. I'll go through these. No, I'll go through this. I finally finished this bad boy, speaking of DC Comics, the comic book Implosion. This is a very fun read. It did take me a little bit longer than I would have thought, because it is an oral history, which is one of my favorite formats for nonfiction. But in this case, it's not exactly the same. There's some live interviews, I think, that were conducted for research for this book, but mostly it's clippings from old comics journals and old DC promotional materials, and then also from, online essays from more current times reflecting back on the late 70s. So it's a great book, and if you're at all interested in the publishing minutiae of comic books, and I can't imagine why any of you wouldn't be, yeah, it was a really interesting look at how it's just one of those things, man. DC could have really could have been an explosion. They were really trying to jumpstart the direct market, because in the 70s still most comic book sales were done through newsstands, but that was declining steadily, and the direct market of comic book stores had not picked up yet. So there was all this money just being, hemorrhaging out of both the big two. But DC was the one who and Jeanette Kahn was like, I can fix this. And she came so close. It's so sad. But what's really the best thing about this is that I found this might be the rarest comic book that I can think of, because it never actually was published and there's only 35 copies of it. I can't seem to find it now. So, again, thumbnail. DC Comics had this great grandiose idea of bumping all the cover prices up to $1, which, at the time most comics were 40 to 50 cents, I want to say. But also bumping up the page count to 100, making them slightly bigger, because Sports Illustrated and Playboy and those magazines that sold really well in the 70s, often newsstands, all cost $1. So DC was like, well, instead of trying to fight with Marvel and with the rest of these magazines for shelf space, why don't we try to join the magazines, do the same thing they're doing, and, maybe, because, comic books were still mostly for kids back then, but there was definitely a growing number of, these running around. So they had a bunch of comics done. They were written and drawn, and then it just almost immediately fell apart, and DC just pulled everything. So the artists and writers involved, the staff, they put together the Cancelled Comics Cavalcade. So they took all the stories that were supposed to have been published that never got published. Some of the stories that had been written and drawn eventually made their way into other books, but there's a whole bunch of them that never were. So they just kind of, and they had Neil Adams and, was Kurt Swan did the other one? Neil Adams and I think Kurt Swan each did a cover. So there's 2 different covers of the Cancelled Comics Cavalcade. There's only 35, according to some sources, 40 copies out there. So, yeah. Once society completely falls apart, I'm going to murder all of you for that. It'll be like a Death Race 2000. I'm just kidding. And then finally, good Lord, I read all these bizarre adventures. Now, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I love Marvel Comics quite a bit. But when they miss, speaking of misses, okay, so this magazine, Bizarre Adventures, and there's other, this was around the time that Epic, they started the Epic imprint, which was creator-owned and more indie-based stuff. They were aimed at more, like I was saying, more of an adult audience, since they're magazine-sized and they're a little more expensive, and there's a little bit of a swear word every now and again, maybe some boobies. But sounds great, right? But it sucks. This magazine sucks really hard. Like, I don't know how else to say it. This is a Paul Gulacy cover, and this Black Widow story that Paul Gulacy drew in here is some of the best art I've ever seen by Paul Gulacy, if not by anyone else. And that's taking into consideration his Master of Kung Fu work. The story itself, hot garbage. Just the worst story. And it's like, you can really tell that the artists were so excited to be working in something other than 4-color comics. This is black and white. This is bigger pages. It's better paper. Oh, man. And they really went to town. Like, Gulacy's just pulling out all the stops in this piece of shit Black Widow story. I'm sorry for swearing. The writers were not up there yet. And Ralph Macchio, bless his heart, aside from being in all the Karate Kid movies, the joke never gets old for him, I'm sure. Not a great writer at some parts in these magazines. This issue was not too shabby because it was all one Kull the Conqueror story. This was usually an anthology series. There'd be a bunch of different stories. But in this one, it's one Kull the Conqueror story, which was really good. And it was, sheesh. Oh, it was drawn by John Bolton. In fact, this is John Bolton's first American work, if I'm not mistaken. John Bolton's a fabulous artist. I knew him from when I was a kid. He drew the backup stories in Classic X-Men, which doesn't sound like much, but trust me, they were brilliant. And then this other issue, I think I pointed this out last time. So I was like, that's Elektra, and then I'm pretty sure that was Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu, and I'm pretty sure that was Iron Fist. And they're all martial arts heroes. I'm like, what the hell is Triton from the Inhumans doing? He's underwater. Turns out it's just 4 different stories. Also turns out this is the Huntsman, and this is Time Hunter. No, that's DC. No, that's Time Master. I don't remember who this guy is. Maybe this guy's the Huntsman. Both of these characters were introduced in this issue and then quickly forgotten about, even by the likes of me. I think each of them made one more appearance somewhere else. Actually, the fun thing about Marvel, this is for me, but with characters like that, I'll look them up on the Marvel Comics database, and they'll say, like, they made 1 or 2 appearances in the 70s, and then years later were in the Initiative, which was a big crossover, or it was the aftermath of Civil War in 2007, where, I don't want to get into it, but it's always fun for me to go, oh, that guy was in the Initiative too. Oh, all right. Why? I don't know, because we like you. All right, that's it for this week, everybody. I'll try to make it a little, good lord, I'm trying to make it a little briefer next week, but until then, you can't shut up, but you can't stop me from talking. All right.